One of the things one notices when one reads the accounts, the original accounts of the event of Karbala, as well as the hadith regarding the figure of Imam Hussein, what's really interesting is the vocabulary that is being used about the event. Really is reminiscent of the notion of sacrifice. And when I speak here of sacrifice, I don't mean sacrifice in its symbolic sense, but here rather in its original ritual sense. And this is where we have to ask ourselves the question of what a sacrifice is. Sacrifice is a ritual through which a person offers usually an animal as a substitute for himself or herself, in order, through the giving of the life of that animal, to signify the death of the old self and the offering of oneself to God, in order to come closer to God. There are certain conditions that are attached to the notion of sacrifice. Now, there are cultures in which we have very detailed descriptions of such rituals, such as, for example, in ancient Vedic India, we have very detailed texts about how sacrifices were conducted. And even to this day, in certain regions of India, you have animal sacrifices that are still being conducted. Another instance of a very famous instance of sacrifice is what we find in the religion of the Old Testament, where the tabernacle, so this tent that was used by the priests of the Israelites, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. So in this tabernacle, this is where the Israelites would offer their sacrifices, and the priest's function would be to basically take care of the whole ritual. Actually, a priest, what is a priest really? A priest is someone who offers sacrifices, and this is how, for example, there's a difference between, for example, an Orthodox Christian or a Catholic clergy and, for example, Protestants, because Protestants, strictly speaking, don't have priests because they don't offer a sacrifice, because they don't have the Mass. And if they do, it's not really a sacrifice that's being performed. Whereas the Oriental Christians, the Catholics and the Orthodox offer a sacrifice. It's not a blood sacrifice, of course, in the sense that we understand. There is no animal being sacrificed, but for them it's Christ in the species of the wine and the bread that are being transubstantiated and become the body and the blood of Christ that are being offered as a sacrifice. So Christ offers himself as a sacrifice through the person of the priest. Now, in Islam, theoretically speaking, what's interesting is that every single Muslim is actually a priest, in a sense that all Muslims have the priestly function, because every single Muslim has the right to basically sacrifice. And so, in a sense, and we see this also, of course, in the early institutions of the first Muslim community, in many ways, the first mosque of the Prophet was a continuation of the tabernacle, except that in the tabernacle there was a separation between the priests and then the rest of the Israelites. But Islam has sort of included all Muslims within the notion of priesthood. And so that separation does not exist. And there's a whole symbolism of sacrifice and of the divine presence that is pretty much present in the first Muslim community. What's really interesting, for example, is that the presence of God in the tabernacle was signified by a cloud that was hovering over the tabernacle, and that represented the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah in Hebrew, it's the presence of God. And what's quite interesting is that from the accounts, we know that there was constantly a cloud that was hovering over the prophet, according to the accounts, because he was the madhar, the locus, the place through which God's presence basically was manifest. So it is then not surprising to see much of the symbolism of the sacrifice of the ancient Hebrews to be present within early Islam. And what's really interesting is that we find a lot of parallels between, on the one hand, the rules regarding sacrifice as described in the Old Testament, and the narrative of Karbala. So, for example, in the religion of the old Israelites, the sacrificial lamb that was used for the Yom Kippur, the Day of the Great Atonement, had to be a white lamb without any spots. It had to be pure, and it was given a red ribbon around its neck in order to signify that it was the chosen animal that was going to be sacrificed for that specific day. And so when that lamb was sacrificed, the blood of the sacrifice was then sprinkled on the walls of the holies of holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And so we find a lot of that symbolism in Karbala. And in many ways, the imagery of the Lamb of God, as this figure is known in the Bible, seems to be of extreme relevance in order to understand the cosmic and mystical meaning of Karbala. So, in the same way as the sacrificial lamb of the religion of the ancient Hebrews was given a red ribbon around its neck to signify that it was the chosen animal for this important sacrifice, Imam Hussein is given a red tunic by the Archangel Gabriel that clearly marks him out as a person that will be killed in an act of an almost sacrificial act. And I shouldn't say almost, because actually it was a sacrificial act, because Imam Rida in a hadith says that Imam Hussein was slaughtered in the same way as sheep are slaughtered, are sacrificed. So there's already, even the Imams talk about this very clear parallel between these sacrificial practices. Now, what's really interesting is that in the same way that the sacrifice has to be performed on consecrated grounds, on sacred grounds, the sacrifice of Karbala takes place in a place that itself is sacred. because we know from the accounts from the Hadith tradition that Imam Hussein, in his celestial form, is the origin of paradise. There's a very famous Hadith that recounts how God created paradise from the light of Imam Hussein. Paradise and the Huris were created from the light of Imam Hussein. And Karbala is a piece of paradise that is here on earth. And in a sense, then what we find this amazing parallel whereby Imam Hussein, as the sacrificial lamb, is being sacrificed on a land that was created from his own light. And this, of course, cannot be a coincidence. Because we're dealing here with a cosmic event, and this relationship between the earth and the other levels of reality is beautifully signified by these facts. And then what you have is a certain number of gestures that Imam Hussein does on the day of Ashura that unmistakably remind us of the act of sacrifice. Imam Hussein, for example, smearing blood on his beard and throwing blood to the sky. These are all reminiscent of the way in which amongst Bani Israel the blood of the sacrificial lamb was sprinkled on the walls of the Holy of Holies of the tabernacle and of the temple, and of course offered to God. And we should also remember that the Imam as a person is the locus, the madhar of the divine presence, of the Shekhinah. And actually we have several hadith where the Imams say that they are the haikal, the temple of the divine secrets. So it's so the smearing of blood on the beard of the Imam is a ritual act. And this is, of course, all because up until now one could say, well, that this is just coincidence. But then Hazrat Zainab makes it very clear when she finally says on that day, when she asks God to accept the sacrifice. And the fact that Hazrat Zainab, who is the ultimate authority on Karbala, specifically declares that what happened in Karbala was a sacrifice, makes it very clear and leaves absolutely no doubt as to the real nature of the event of Karbala. So we're not dealing here with the death of a revolutionary. We're dealing here with a cosmic ritual act whereby a being of exceptional purity, from which paradise was created, from whose light paradise was created, offers himself as a sacrifice. And this is the other beauty about Karbala, is that in Karbala we have the perfect union of the sacrifice, the sacrificer, the person who offers the sacrifice, and the place of sacrifice, right? Imam Hussein is the sacrifice himself. He's also the one who offers the sacrifice. And the place was made from his light. So there's this union of sacrifice, sacrificer, and the place of sacrifice. And of course the words of Hazrat Zainab make it even more clear. And to therefore say that the event of Karbala is a sort of purely political act is absolute madness. Because that's not how Hazrat Zainab spoke about it. And when she speaks of sacrifice, she's not using some poetic license. She's not a person of the 20th or 21st century that uses symbolic language, because of course modern people do not have any notion of sacrifice. For them, sacrifice is something purely symbolic. But Hazrat Zainab lived in a culture where sacrifice was part and parcel of ritual life. And one also must not forget that the Ark of the Covenant, as the name says, is the ark in which the founding document of the oath between God and the Bani Israel was kept. And in the Futuwa treatises, Imam Hussein is, and not just in the Futuwa treatises, but in several hadith and du'as from the Imams, Imam Hussein is remembered as the person who's kept the mithaq, the protector of the mithaq, and so he's the protector of the covenant, and he himself is he himself is the living Ark of the Covenant in human form. And again, here the symbolism could not be clearer. And so it's a mystery to me, really, as to how modern people fail to realize, even though the sources are very clear on this issue, that Karbala is first and foremost a sacrificial act. And behind the sacrificial act, there is the boundless love of God. Because this the sacrifice, of course, has an origin in a promise that God made to Abraham. He told Abraham that he would ransom his son that was about to be sacrificed. That he would ransom his son through a mighty sacrifice, and the fulfillment of this promise is Imam Hussein, who sacrifices himself not just for the son of Abraham, for Ismail, but also for all other prophets. And this is the beauty of Imam Hussein, is that he has taken upon himself the most vicious attack of the armies of Jahal, of ignorance, of darkness, in order to shield the prophets and the believers from utter destruction. And so when one understands that Imam Hussein is the supreme Qurban, and that one understands that he has offered himself as a ransom for the prophets, for the believers, his sacrifice becomes an act of absolute beauty. There's a very beautiful Celtic legend from Ireland, which talks about a bird known as the thorn bird. So there's this legend, there's a story about a bird that sings only once in its life. And as soon as it leaves its nest, it searches for a thorn tree. And it never rests until it finds one. And when it finds one, it sings. And when it sings, it outsings the lark and the nightingale. But as it sings, it impales itself on the longest thorn of the thorn tree and dies. But as it dies, it brings awe to the entirety of creation. And the legend says that God smiles at the beauty of the song of the thorn bird. And I think I can't think of a more beautiful way of describing what happened in Karbala, because this is really what Imam Hussein does. He performs an act of supreme love that unites heaven and earth. and that is an expression of God's love for humanity, in offering humanity a vehicle of salvation through the darling son of Fatima al-Zahra.